Let's begin. Welcome to the Economic Affairs Committee. This is the 12th public hearing of our inquiry into the economic impact on our UK energy policy of shale gas and oil. Mr. Wright, we're very grateful indeed to you for coming. Apologies for the slight delay, but we had one or two bits of business to conduct. And we're very grateful to you also for your paper, which you sent us some time ago, and which certainly excited our interest. You've very extensive experience of shale and oil gas exploration in the United States, and we will be asking you very much about your experience there to fill out what you say in your paper. Could I start with a question? It arises from an article in The Economist, the Christmas edition of The Economist, which concluded that, and I quote, "The fracking boom could be every bit as important as the gold rush in the United States." How do you feel about that?
Yeah, a big statement. I lived in California for a long time, so I mean, the gold rush certainly was enormous. I mean, it created the city of San Francisco and brought 300,000 people to California. So it was quite a significant event in California history. In a broader scale, I mean, gold is a store of value, right? So if you print more money or you discover more gold, it just results in an inflation or a decrease in the value of that asset. So the gold rush ultimately just transferred wealth from previous holders of gold to the people who profited from the gold rush. Where the shale boom is quite different. We're not producing a store of value. We're producing a good that creates human well-being, that allows the production and growth. So I think it's a much larger increase in real wealth. And of course, the scale of the shale boom, as you well know, is quite tremendous and definitely measured in the hundreds of billions of dollars.
So could you just expand a little bit more about how you think the development of shale gas and oil will be for the US in the future? I mean, I think we've had a lot of evidence about what it's doing at the moment.
I wrote some prepared remarks. Is it inappropriate to read those?
Yes, please do.
They're maybe 3 or 4 minutes. First of all, I'll say, yeah, I from a kid, my interest in astronomy, I've been interested in energy, what powered the stars. I've been a technology and energy entrepreneur my entire life. And by good fortune or luck, I was involved in the shale revolution at the very start with Mitchell Energy via a company I founded in 1992 that started the fracture mapping industry, measuring how fractures grow. But stepping back, I'd say energy has always been intimately connected with human well-being. 1,000 years ago, in energy innovation, using horses instead of oxen to pull plows doubled the available energy to medieval farmers. This increase in human efficiency played a significant role in ending feudalism. In Britain, the proud tradition of human freedom, and especially economic freedom, via Magna Carta, the Glorious Revolution, and ultimately 1842's Registration Act, enabled the launching of the Industrial Revolution. In addition to economic freedom, the Industrial Revolution required cheap and abundant power. In the Midlands of England, this came from coal. From the 1840s until today, inflation-adjusted per capita income increased 25-fold. This unprecedented increase in human well-being doubled human life expectancy and created the modern world. So today, access to cheap and reliable energy sources plays a major role where investments are made and new jobs are created. For example, an area I work in North Dakota, the modern hydraulic fracturing, or what we're calling today fracking, came to North Dakota's Bakken Shale in earnest in 2006. 6 years later, North Dakota's per capita income had grown from 39th among the 50 US states to 7th. Today, North Dakota has 2.7% unemployment and a massive state budget surplus. It also produces more oil now than the United Kingdom. The shale revolution, brought about by modern fracking, began about 15 years ago in the Barnett Shale, just north of Fort Worth, Texas. Mitchell Energy had a gas processing plant and a contract with the Chicago utility to supply a certain amount of gas. Falling production from their conventional fields was threatening that contract. The start of the shale revolution, or fracking, in 1998 allowed Mitchell to reverse their declining production and start quite a significant rise in gas production. It took off rapidly, and by 2007, the Barnett Shale was by far the largest natural gas field in the United States, producing about 10% of U.S. supply, which is equal to about 2/3 of the entire United Kingdom consumption. All of this from 3 counties, Tarrant, Denton, and Wise County, that had a population of just under 3 million people and a little bit less than 3,000 square miles. So a population density of about 1,000 people per square mile, roughly equal to roughly equal to the Netherlands, and certainly well above the United Kingdom. This got notice. But although in 2008, the US was still frantically building natural gas import facilities, LNG import facilities. Of course, now they're being converted to export facilities. But the shale gas revolution didn't really get recognized as a game changer until 2009. And since then, from 2009 until I sit here today, the average price of natural gas in the United States has been about 1/3 what it's been in the United Kingdom and the European Union. That difference in price of the cost of our gas, a little less than $4, and your gas, $10 to $12, is a $200 billion a year annual savings to the United States. This equates to about $1,500 per U.S. family. Reshoring, it's led to a massive reshoring boom that you've read about as well. To take one example, natural gas is mostly methane, but it produces some natural gas liquids, ethane, propane, butane. Just with ethane, which is what we make plastics out of, there's 50 facilities under construction on the Gulf Coast, $40 billion of investment to use this ethane as a feedstock. These are the benefits from shale gas. Oil, today, 80% of the drilling rigs in the United States are drilling for oil, not gas. The numbers are just as impressive there. In 2005, the U.S. produced 5.5 million barrels of oil per day, and we imported about 60% of our liquid fuels. Today, we recently passed 8 million barrels of oil per day, and we're well below 40% in imported oil. We also realize huge savings from how much cheaper oil is in the United States. A surplus of production there pushes down the local price to a little bit more than 10% below the world average. The shale industry was estimated, just this new industry that started about 10 years ago, contributed $75 billion in government revenue in 2012. So what's not to like about this? Number one, huge change in economic growth always creates disruptions. Imagine what it was like as we sit here right now when this awe-inspiring building was built. Certainly there was a lot of dust and activity to construct it, but the world has been changed by it. Modern fracking with long-reach horizontal wellbores, and I can talk more about that in the questions, uses a little bit less than 1% of the surface land, above an oil and gas field. So when you drive in western North Dakota, the farm output and the ranch output hasn't changed, where a traditional oil field might impact 10 to 20% of the land above. So the developments of it have really been to shrink the human footprint on the surface from producing it. Over 2 million fractures have been executed in the United States over its 65-year history. Not a single case that we've found yet of groundwater contamination from it. Fracking has also significantly reduced U.S. CO2 emissions. In fact, last year, United States CO2 emissions per capita were lower than they've been any year since I was born. So what are the biggest risks to shale fracking? They're the same as the biggest risks to conventional oil and gas drilling. It's assuring that you have a nice cement integrity outside of the casing, inside of the borehole. That's how you seal unwanted migration. First 40 years of the U.S. oil and gas industry, there was no cement used at all. In 1903, they started to cement them, and it's continued to get better. So it's cement seal, and it's disposal of the produced water that comes from underground. Whether you're producing oil or gas or natural gas liquid, you always produce some water. That water is nasty, and you want to dispose of it. It should be injected deep underground. The regulations on cement and well construction have gotten more rigorous in the United States, and I support that. And we've moved to almost all produced water being re-injected, and I support that as well. So it's been a big deal in our country, and I think it can be in the UK as well, and I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you. Lord Lawson. It's very good to have you here, and you obviously have an intimate knowledge of the United States experience. And to some extent, I think you know a little bit about the United Kingdom because you come here from time to time. We have had a survey which demonstrates that we have, in the north of England alone, which is the only part that's been surveyed, a huge amount of potential shale resources. But the important question is what percentage of those resources which the survey has found
you think are economically recoverable? Because that is a major question which affects our judgment on how important it is in the United Kingdom. Based on your experience, great experience in the United States, and your knowledge of the United Kingdom, which although less is by far from negligible, what percentage is your best guess is recoverable from the resources that we have?
It's a hard question to answer because the devil's always in the details of gas recovery. It's different in different rocks. Most importantly, I think it's been different with time. When shale gas started, the hope was to get 2 to 5% out. Now in gas, there are places where shale gas recovery is 40%. So no one thought we'd get to 10. And in areas, the best rock, the best fracture treatments, we've gotten to 40%. With oil, you get a lower amounts. But
I was thinking particularly of gas. I was
Yes.
thinking particularly of gas, which is obviously what the focus is on in the United Kingdom at the present time.
Yes, and to date, we don't have the production data that's key to reliably answering that, but the core data, the actual geological data we have of the Bowen Shale looks very promising. It certainly looks to be a far superior shale and far more gas in place than the Barnett Shale I discussed under Fort Worth, Texas. So my personal guess is that the recoverable gas from that will be immense. And as that production gets going, you'll find other shales. The estimates of recoverable gas in the UK will continue to grow if there's development.
But in this range you've described between 2 to 5% on one hand and 40% or maybe more on the other hand, whereabouts within that range, which is quite a big range, would you guess, and I realise you don't know, is the position in the United Kingdom?
A guess will be 10 to 20%, but it could be much higher.
Right, and one other thing about the United Kingdom, before we move on, it has been represented to us that we cannot replicate the United States experience because the United States is geographically a very big country, whereas we are a small country with a very high population density. And that is going to make it impossible for us to replicate anything like the American experience. Do you see that as a problem?
I don't. I've driven across northern England where the Bowen Shale is, and it's rolling countryside. It looks like North Dakota after it's rained. So and as I said, the Barnett Shale, our original, where the shale gas revolution began, was under the city of Fort Worth and the northern suburbs, so in a rather high population density for the United States. So, my company, we've personally worked on hydraulic fracture treatments in Beverly Hills and Los Angeles. Is there going to be drilling in downtown London? Highly unlikely, although there is in downtown LA. But in most of the British countryside, no, it looks to me to be quite favorable for shale gas development.
Thank you. Can I pursue the question of what is recoverable and what the advantages could be to us? So David King said to this committee last week that for shale to have a similar impact in the UK as in the US, we'd have to drill between 1,000 and 2,000 wells a year. And do you recognise those figures? Does that sound to you to be about right? Given your North Dakota experience.
In the U.S., we talk mostly in terms of drilling rigs. How many drilling rigs are running, and then they run continuously and drill wells. And in shale gas, maybe a round number is a drilling rig might drill 20 wells in a year. In the United States right now, we have 350 rigs drilling for natural gas. So that would be 7,000 wells a year are drilled in the United States. Our natural gas production is growing. We passed Russia 2 years ago. So I can say 7,000 wells has changed world gas markets. The British market is an eighth the size of the United States, maybe a tenth the size of the U.S. with our gross now and gas exports to Mexico. So 700 wells or 35 drilling rigs would probably supply UK gas if it was parallel to the United States.
Okay. And could you say something about rates of decline then as well? One of the factors that we obviously would have to consider is what rates of decline there would be. And are they high in the US, the rates of decline?
Yeah, as you go to lower permeability rocks, which is what the shale revolution is, we're going to lower and lower permeability rocks. You create fractures with more contact area so that you can get an economic amount of gas out. And yes, the rate of production decline from the first month to the 13th month is quite steep. I don't view this as a negative at all, because when we make a plan about drilling a well, one of the things you estimate early on in your plan is how much gas are you going to get out of that well. You know, a shale well in Pennsylvania might produce 10 billion cubic feet of gas. Would you rather get it out quickly or slowly? I'm actually quite in favor of getting as much of it out in front as possible.
Right. So I just want to understand your numbers clearly. I think you said that in the UK we probably have 35 rigs a year. Did that include an estimate of the rate of decline? In other words, that would be 35 a year, each year, but that would include what we lose through the rate of decline.
Yeah, correct. Well, I just drew that parallel from the United States. We have 350 natural gas rigs drilling in the United States. Almost half of our entire gas production is from shale. So all of those wells have a high rate of decline. And with 350 rigs drilling in the United States right now, our gas production is inclining, it's growing, not declining. So each well's production declines with time, as with any resource extraction. But yeah, that's why to have a stable or growing production, you have to continuously run drilling rigs. That's been a fact of the oil industry from the start.
Right, and so finally, on the basis of driving across Lancashire, you think that there would be no noticeable impact on the countryside as a consequence of the number of drills that you think, number of rigs and the number of wells that you think we'd have to sink. You don't think there would be a noticeable problem?
Oh, there definitely would be a noticeable impact. You know, drilling rigs are 200 feet tall, so that, you know, they'll be viewed. There'll be a lot of cars and trucks, people going to work. Each drill pad is maybe 5 or 10 acres, so there would definitely be a visible impact, and no doubt about it. But sort of bang for the buck in land usage, it's about as good as we've got in the U.S. right now. But definitely there's an impact, of course.
Lord Gibbs, you don't think the visual impact will be rather like that of an army advancing across open countryside?
No,
as each generation of wells is exhausted, so you build more outwards.
Well, probably everyone in the room has traveled to the United States, and has anyone seen a drilling rig in the United States?
I haven't, but others have.
Yeah, so you know, if you're in normal course of business in the U.S., you have to be lucky to see a drilling rig. So they're there. If you live, you know, in a natural gas field, if you lived in western North Dakota, you've seen it for sure. So in the area where there's development, definitely it's visible. But does it wildly change the landscape? Certainly nothing compared to when I drive around England. I see windmills everywhere. I don't see drilling rigs everywhere when I drive across the United States.
I was just referring to the fact that there'll be a widening area.
Well, when the rig moves on, and for maybe about a month or 20 days it drills, and then the rig leaves, some fracturing equipment comes on, and then that leaves, and then there's a wellhead. You know, it's like 15 feet tall, and with a shrub you won't see it. So after the well is drilled, you won't see it anymore. So the only thing you see are wells being drilled. You don't see wells that are producing. So as you drill more and more wells in the country, the only thing you see is the wells that are actually being drilled, not the wells that are already drilled.
Thank you. Lord Roberto.
Thank you. Could we talk about the costs, and I would appreciate your views on whether you think that the developing of shale gas in the United Kingdom would be a higher cost than it currently is, or no, not currently, but that it was in the United States?
Yeah, I think undoubtedly it will be higher costs. There's no question about it. In the U.S., we have, you know, a large service industry. There's, you know, lots of trained people. The regulations and ability to move quickly is there. So it's quite efficient. It's cheaper to drill a well in the U.S. than about any other country in the world. And if you drill in other countries, costs are escalated by a number of different things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a well cost here probably would be around 2x what it would cost in the U.S. But with gas prices that are 3x, I think the prospects for it being economic are quite strong. And if it grew, of course, and you supplied all of British domestic gas from these 35 or so drilling rigs, your costs would come down. You know, the efficiencies would be there, the process would be in place. Initial wells will definitely be expensive.
Do you expect the costs in the industry of the United States to keep reducing?
I would say that the cost per barrel produced or per, you know, increment of gas being produced, those are dropping pretty rapidly right now. I expect they'll continue to gradually decline, at least for the next 10 years or so. Ultimately, you'll drill out the best spots and you'll go to the less attractive spots. So all the different U.S. shale plays have different costs of production. So a lot of them are going quiescent right now because the Marcellus in Pennsylvania and the Utica in Ohio are just cheaper production costs than the others.
Yeah, thank you. Would that be, what is your view on whether the technology, the advance obviously in technology, is contributing to lowering costs?
Oh, hugely, hugely. I mean, that's for 25 years, that's what I've done is work on fracturing technology. And I've also run two production companies, a natural gas production company and an oil production company. And our cost or production per barrel is far lower today than it was 4 or 5 years ago. And same thing for the shale gas players as well. So I think there's plenty of room to run in the technology there as it will continue to get better.
You alluded a moment ago to the ability of the workforce and, in other words, getting it trained and leading on to the supply chain. How quickly did this happen? Well, it's very difficult to compare to the United States. I realize. How quickly do you think it could happen?
You know, I would say quickly. In my time in northern England, there was definitely, you know, quite a workforce there with the skills required, I think, for oil and gas drilling. Really, it's mechanical savvy, people who's an auto mechanic or worked on the construction of a house or anybody who's got that. The technical skills are quite prevalent in the UK. So I think it would happen quite quickly. My personal view in the UK is the efficiency of the permitting and the ability to deploy capital will determine the speed at which it happens. People and service industries, they follow economic activity, and they happen quickly.
Other than people, what are the other big components of the supply chain?
Drilling rigs,
Yes.
which are abundant. There's a surplus of in the United States. I'm sure our rig companies would love to ship some out of our own country.
I hope they're modern enough.
Yes, yeah. Well, the modern rigs, that's a great point you raise, is the old rigs are being retired in the U.S. Modern rigs are much more expensive, but they're so much faster that the efficiencies of them is just displacing the old rigs. And again, we 7-10 years ago, we had 5 times as many rigs drilling for U.S. gas, and our gas production was declining, and gas prices were going up. So we have far fewer rigs today because they're so much more efficient. But it'll be better, you know, 5 years from now as well. But the rigs, yeah, fracturing equipment, some kind of proppant or sand supply is, yeah, it would happen quite quickly, I think, if the business climate was here.
Thank you.
Lord Mayor.
Curiously different question about costs, which is the following. I thought it's worth raising at this point. I don't know whether you're aware of it, but in the UK we have Climate Change Act, primary legislation, and we're committed to reducing the fossil fuel we burn by 2050 by 80%. And en route to that, our intermediate and agreed so-called legally binding target to 2030 is based on decarbonising electricity by 2030. Now, I, for one, think that gas in the interim replacing coal is a really good thing. But I just wonder, as you're thinking about the longer-term costs of this industry, to what extent the fact that if we remain serious about these tasks, that does have implications for shale gas, and I would have thought for the investment now for when the return is not going to be coming because we're going to be not using gas very much, unless we can sequester CO2. And I wonder whether anybody ever thinks about this.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Normally, when you drill in the U.S., if you drill an oil and gas well, you're looking for your return, and you're going to get 70% of the gas out in the first 5 years.
Yes, I mean, you're certainly not hampered by any regulations about caring about carbon in the US.
We've dropped our CO2 emissions more than any major nation, so it's a...
That's an absolute but not relative terms. But that's a distraction.
It's dropped 12% in the last 5 years in the United States. It depends on the time frame. I think the bigger issue there would be about the infrastructure. Yeah, to build a pipeline gathering system, to build natural gas burning power plants. Those are longer lived assets. And so yeah, if the life of natural gas was 5 years, you probably wouldn't draw the capital for pipelines and for gathering plants. Drilling wells actually is a quicker payback business. But no question, you have to have a long-term time horizon where you're going. I think unquestionably you could drive a significant drop in CO2 emissions by building a shale gas industry here. But yeah, it'd have to be some when's everybody going home date. If it's 2030, you probably could build an industry here. If it's 2020, you probably couldn't.
Thank you. Good answer.
Lord Griffiths.
In your introductory remarks, you talk a little about the transformation which had happened in the Bakken shale field in North Dakota. And I wonder if you could expand on that, on how it transformed the local communities.
Yeah, so North Dakota, like I'm sure in the UK as well, but in rural states in the United States, population has been declining. North Dakota's population peaked in 1930, and it's been on a slow decline since then. And declining populations are tough on communities. And farm income and the amount of percent of the U.S. population that works on farms, it was 40% at year 1900, and it's about 1% today. So rural communities have maybe had it tough. And so the oil and gas industry coming into an area like North Dakota, it's been just an enormous boom there. Farmers think of it both as additional income now, but it means that their grandchildren can farm. And the funniest thing is people who we drill their wells on, they of course make a lot of money in royalties from our stuff, but they're still farming 7 days a week. They haven't changed what they've done. This is what they do. But now the certainty that their grandchildren can farm is there as well. The young generally leave these rural communities and go to the cities for jobs. Now they have jobs there. Now they're coming back. In fact, there's a lot of temporary workers in North Dakota because there aren't enough workers in North Dakota. So there's a lot of people living there temporarily on rotation. But there's no question when you grow that rapidly, are there stresses on the roads and the infrastructure and the town? Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it does have a little bit of a gold rush feel there. It's better now than 2 years ago. It was very hard to get a place to stay. There weren't many hotels. Now there's many new hotels been built. There's restaurants there. So the boom is going on. The stresses have come down a bit. But I always say that I not only get Christmas cards, but I get Thanksgiving cards from the farmers' lands we drill on in North Dakota. So it's been a great partnership, with the people there and the industry.
Of the jobs that are created there, what proportion would you say were permanent, and what proportion would be temporary? And how much would have been confined to the industry? How much would have been in the wider economic area?
Yeah, great question. So the jobs with the industry tend to follow drilling rigs. So in the Bakken, I would say with the current plan, we may have a similar number of drilling rigs we have right now, probably for the next 20 or 30 years. Then as a field gets more mature, they'll still be drilling, they'll still be fracking, but the jobs will probably decline a little bit after then. Certainly the vast majority of the jobs created are not directly in the oil and gas industry.
The majority
are not in the oil and gas industry. They're in all the support functions and jobs. In fact, I mentioned North Dakota with the lowest unemployment in the United States. The second lowest unemployment in the United States is South Dakota. And also one of the lowest unemployments in the United States is Minnesota. So the states that border it, their economies have been lifted up quite a bit as well. So it's there's $30 billion every year invested in North Dakota. So it's a massive economic stimulus. And the shale industry as a whole, there's about 150 billion in the U.S.
So at least for the next few decades, you see this as economic prosperity for the Dakotas.
Well, yes, absolutely. And what will happen after that? With the technologies I developed to look at fractures were done in oil fields that began in the 20s and 30s. So people always, oil fields keep going. There's lots of oil still there. In fact, what probably comes next and is being tested in North Dakota is to inject CO2 into the Bakken oil. If you inject CO2 into oil, it gets absorbed in the oil and it allows mobility of it. So the primary drilling might go for another 20 or 30 years, and then you'll have probably CO2 or organic gas flooding. The Bakken field goes certainly for somewhere 50 to 100 years, I'd say.
To what extent was the welcome by the local community and also the increasing prosperity due to the fact, as I understand it, that the landowners stroke farmers owned the mineral rights to the land underneath and therefore have a continuing revenue for some time to come?
Oh, I think a significant part. There's no question that immediately aligns a partnership, between the farmers and the landowners and the companies. Now, the majority of people that live in North Dakota now, the vast majority, don't own mineral rights. So they're benefited by jobs and their property's worth more and all that. But there's no question it helps enormously that the landowners own those royalty rights, and their money obviously flows out into the community in other ways as well. I've gone on record in the UK of saying and I'm not a developer and have no plans to develop in the UK, but if I did, I probably would offer a 2% to the surface owners of the land, because they'd immediately become my partners. They'd immediately want it to happen. They'd immediately want it to be better than it was going to be otherwise. Where if it's just a surface use fee or the money goes abstractly to a government far away, it's a different feel. But I think that can be fixed by businessmen.
Baron Snopes.
Shifting on to the impact of the development of shale gas as it's happened in the US onto other industries, in particular energy-intensive industries, petrochemical industries. I wonder if you could describe the experience in the US.
I mentioned that 40 billion of investment. That's just ethane. So ethane is what they make plastic out of. So of course there's massive investment in the U.S. going to that. But the far bigger impact, Lady Noakes, to your point, is of methane, of this low cost of energy. So this has led to fertilizer industry returning to the United States. This has led to steel manufacturing in the United States. I myself am a partner in building a plant. We spent $200 million to build a manufacturing plant in Georgia, Rennes, Georgia, a small town in Georgia. And the last 5 or 10 plants like it were built in China. But today, the energy cost advantage of the U.S. over China more than offsets the labor cost disadvantage in energy-intensive manufacturing. So in the Midwestern states, which, Indiana, Illinois, that do not have oil and gas production in them, are getting an enormous economic benefit from it. Sorry.
To finish.
Yeah, I rode on the plane with a executive in a very large South African petrochemical company that said, the future of their business was in the United States. They were diversified around the world now, but it was hard to justify investing money anywhere but in the United States.
And that came about because of this extraordinary fall in the price of gas in the States.
Yes.
So for us to be confident we would get an equivalent impact in the UK, we would have to be able to postulate a similar sort of fall in the price of gas in the UK. And some of the evidence that we've had is that because we're we're taking effectively a European gas price, that the gas price won't fall in the same way, and so the opportunities for the UK would not be commensurate with those that we've seen in the US. I wondered if you have a view on the likely impact in the UK.
Yeah, I read those and I've been quite puzzled to read it. Obviously the United States is connected by pipeline with Canada and Mexico, and our gas market's much larger than the European gas market. So if it caused a big decline in the US, I have trouble imagining why it wouldn't in Europe. If you increase the supply of a commodity, it's going to have an impact. The other thing I should say, though, when we talk or compare of U.S. prices versus European, I mentioned a factor of 4. This is the so-called NYMEX price or Henry Hub price. So this is the price of gas at one location in Louisiana. The price of gas all throughout the country is quite different. In fact, there's places in the country where gas is less than $2. You have to move gas and transport gas. So where gas is produced, it's cheap. Where gas has to be transported a long way, it's expensive. So even in the U.S., there's quite a differential in gas prices and quite a differential in oil prices. So where factories and plants are being built in the U.S., they're choosing where in the U.S. they have advantageous gas prices. So anywhere you produce a commodity in significant amount, you will have a price impact. No doubt about it. If you develop gas in northern England, you will see manufacturing right local to that gas spring up.
Thank you very much.
Lord McFall.
It's been suggested that the gas exploration in the US has increasingly been determined by the price of oil and natural gas liquids. Do you agree?
Yeah, so originally, if I go back to the, as I said, when the shale revolution was hitting stream in '08, when it scaled to magnitude, about 80% of US drilling rigs were drilling for gas. It's much easier to produce gas than oil, and the energy equivalent price of gas was not that much below oil, so it was more profitable to drill for gas. Today, the shale revolution's been so successful that now, as the technology got better, we have a vast surplus of gas, and we've pushed prices down. So yes, now instead of 20% of the rigs drilling for oil, 80% of our rigs are drilling for oil. So the natural gas liquids is part of the 20% that are drilling for gas and NGLs. So yes, when the price moved down, people drilled other things, but it doesn't take us very many rigs right now to keep U.S. gas production actually inclining.
Sure. Information we have is that the current gas price in the US is under $4 million British thermal units, per million British thermal units. And some experts have indicated to us that they believe the break-even price to cover the cost of a well's life cycle is $6 per million British thermal units. Is that those figures in the same ballpark as you're thinking?
Well, no, there's not really one price for break-even. If you're drilling in southwestern Pennsylvania, at $3, you have a greater than 50% rate of return. So there's a lot of places where a $3 gas price is fabulously profitable. Now, there are other shale plays where at $4 you make no money and you need $6 to drill.
Sure.
There's places that were drilled when gas prices were quite high that take $7 or $8 to make money. So there's really sort of a palette of production price of, the price you need to make a reasonable return at. So the drilling just goes to the low-cost areas, and as the demand grows, it'll eventually migrate to the slightly higher-cost areas.
Would you consider investing in UK shale gas production at present? Think of yourself, not your personal investment. You said you weren't going to engage in, but would it make sense for a business person to do that just now?
Not right now. If you had, I'm in favor of strict regulations myself, and if you had rigorous but crisp and clear environmental regulations, and you had a way to align the community, and you had a way to move quickly, I'd do it in a heartbeat. But that's not there today. Our watch of the shale gas that was discovered years ago, and none's come to the surface yet. So I think if the business climate was here, it would happen. The other thing I should say on that is people, when you think of the oil and gas industry, people think of very big companies, Exxon, Mobil, Shell, BP, and these companies are fabulous at a 15-year plan to spend billions of dollars to build a platform and to do all this and execute it. Shale gas is a totally different game. There were no big oil companies involved in all the development of shale gas. Shell, for example, entered the U.S. shale gas market, bought it in a bunch of plays, and they're leaving. It's not a game for big companies. Every rock is different. Every rock you've got to innovate. This didn't work. We got to target the well a different place, or we need a different frac recipe. The combination of the stress state, you have to be able to move quickly to figure out the formula, the right way to make it work, and then you've got to continue to innovate that as you move away from that original drilling place.
So very interesting that you mentioned about the issue of environmental regulation. Perhaps we can get something more for you later on from the chairman in that. But you also mentioned about squaring local communities, and we've had representation from a number of communities opposed to fracking. And indeed today, the county of Lancashire, all of the MPs from all parties and 5 of the council leaders have written a letter to the Prime Minister saying that a 10% share of profits from shale gas sites would be required if the community support was to be forthcoming, really. Now, is that a realistic figure, or would that knock the fracking exploration out of the ballpark, a figure like that?
Hard for me to maybe speak too much on those details. In
10%, I want you to focus on that.
To me, it depends what other taxes, what other levies are there. In the United States, for example, a typical lease, when I drill in North Dakota, somewhere between 15 and 20% of the revenues that come from that well go to the mineral owners. And then the state takes about another 10%, in sort of severance tax. And that works. But it works because we have aligned owners and things move quick. So a large amount of the revenues from oil and gas drilling do go elsewhere. Obviously, there's a limit where it doesn't work. But it's hard to answer to that 10. If that 10% was the total royalty that was paid, and it got everybody on the side of the activity, that would probably work fine. But it's probably not, I don't know what the British tax system is. I should plead my ignorance of your, of the business law here.
But it's pretty smart.
I'll say something stupid, or stupider than I've already said.
I think we understand your reservations on that particular one.
Thank you.
Lord Skidelsky.
Great question.
When do you expect the US government to commence exports of LNG?
Well, we've had 4 plants.
Not US government, US.
Yes, yeah. So there's been 4 plants permitted. And again, ironically, the first one that'll start exporting about 2 years from now, the very beginning of 2016, it was permitted and built to import LNG in the United States. But it's, they say the end of 15. I think realistically it'll be, early in 2016, early in 2016, we will export gas LNG. Right now, we export it to Mexico, and there's a project underway to double the capacity of that pipeline. So the Mexican exports are growing rapidly. LNG will go out in 2 years.
And you think it'll take a bit longer to become a net exporter, or do you think about that?
Yeah.
That'll be about the time?
Yeah, that's probably 17 or something. Canadian imports are declining quite a bit right now. We probably become a net exporter 2 to 3 years from now.
How do you think the export of LNG will affect gas prices in Europe, or and in the United States as well, when it becomes a net exporter?
Great question. Of course, if there's more LNG exported, it'll put some downward pressure on LNG. The problem of LNG is if gas leaves the U.S. at $4, the price today is about $4, it's about $5 to $6 to compress it, ship it, regasify it, and bring it back on. So I don't think you can have a marginal price of gas anywhere probably below $10 with LNG as your marginal supply. So I don't think you get cheap gas prices in Britain no matter how much LNG you import. In the U.S., if we export gas, as we will, Of course, it's a marginal increase in demand, and it'll have a marginal bumping up in the price. But with the plans right now for exporting of LNG and the reshoring of manufacturing, the futures curve, you could today buy gas for 2020 delivery in the US, and it's $5. So oil actually in the US is the opposite. If you buy oil 5 years from now, it's 15 to 20% cheaper than it is to buy it today. So I think there'll be a small upward pressure in gas prices from it, but it's very hard to imagine a scenario of gas prices getting to $6 again.
And can you imagine production of UK shale gas having an impact on the price of gas in the United Kingdom? I mean, or will it be on too small a scale to affect our domestic gas price? I mean,
well, as I said, I think that devil's in the details there. But if you had a clear regime, of what it took and how you developed and did development drilling, and again, if you were equivalent to the U.S. and you ran 35 drilling rigs in England and you produced the entire UK production from British gas wells, there's no question about it. You'd have a significant drop in British gas prices, probably a dramatic drop.
Lord Lawson.
Following on from that, it seems to me that the issue is not so much in terms of talking about what has just been either cost, looking at the cost of producing shale gas in the United Kingdom. It's not so much the proper regulation, because I'm sure we would have that in place, and it's not difficult. It is delays, because time is money. Time is the cost. And is it not most important, if you were giving advice based on your own great experience, your advice would be not to cut corners on the regulation, but to cut out unnecessary delays?
I agree wholeheartedly. And time is more than just money. That's a great point. Of course, time is a huge amount of money and risk of money, but it's more than that. To make it work with British rocks, you've got a different stress regime. You're going to have different microfracturing in the rocks. We don't understand these yet. And to make it work, it's going to require innovation. The first well is going to produce some gas, and it's going to have some shortcomings and some problems. And you go, wow, we should have done this. And then the second well, there'll be a learning curve. And if it takes a year to permit each one of those wells, no one will be around for the learning curve. It won't happen. So I could not agree more, Lord Lawson. That, I think, is the key thing. If you have some certainty and can move quickly, it will happen in the UK. And if it's slow and cumbersome, I don't know if it'll happen.
Lord Mayor.
What other countries do you think are likely to become significant producers of shale gas? And when do you think significant production from such countries is likely to show up?
Great. Well, your first question's easier than your second one. And I put some notes on that. If I can't find them, then I'll just wing it. Speaking of that, right now, Canada is a major player in shale gas, right? So they're the other second player. Their resources and reserves are vastly greater than their current production, and their problem is just market. Canada already has enough gas. They already export some to the U.S. So there'll be projects in Canada to build pipelines to export LNG. And there's huge investments being made in that already. When that happens, Canada will become a massive shale gas producer together with the U.S. China is certainly going at it hard. Not great success yet. They haven't been very successful in getting more entrepreneurial, smaller companies to go at it yet. That might change. Argentina and Russia have tremendous quality shale rocks. They could both be world-class producers quickly. And I think they are going to grow pretty quickly in spite of the political situation there. The rocks are tremendous. And then there's a number of other places, with potential. Certainly Tunisia, Algeria, Turkey, Colombia, the United Kingdom, and several others have what look to be very promising rocks, but efforts haven't launched yet. And where those efforts take hold, I think will be dominantly driven on the efficiency of the regulatory regime, how efficiently you can drill and innovate.
Taking the liberty of indulging my own curiosity, what about Australia, my country?
It was on my list, and I forgot to mention it.
And it has the advantage of being a really empty place.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's as critical as some say, but yeah, but Australia has what looks like quite promising rocks. It's got a favorable business climate. I think Australia, yes, think a lot will happen there in the next few years. I get called about Australia all the time.
Coming quickly back to the UK, international companies like Shell have been involved in shale exploration in the US, other parts of the world, but why do you think it is that so few of the bigger companies have been involved in the UK?
In the UK?
In the UK.
Well, for the same reason that they're not really involved in the US. It's not a big company game. It's not a thing you can plan 10 years in advance. It's a thing that you look at the geology and you pick what you think is the best place. You drill a few wells, you find out you were wrong, and then you find out which way you think you were wrong, and then you try something different. It's just they didn't play any part in the start of it. They've come in, but Shell is even exiting right now, unconventional in the U.S. Exxon came into it by buying another company, but at least in North Dakota, they're one of the lowest quality producers we've got. It's really been driven by private, faster moving, or public, but smaller, entrepreneurial, fast moving companies.
Your website actually says that you've got, you're searching for additional investment opportunities worldwide. And I think you've touched on this earlier, but could you recapitulate what are the factors you'd consider before investing outside the US in general and in the UK in particular?
The certainty to move quickly, to be able to innovate and do things different, learn from our mistakes, and act on them in a timely fashion. Again, I don't think I've ever been to our website, so you're one up on me. And, but
well, to be truthful, I haven't either.
In North Dakota, for example, Little Liberty, we are the #1 average well quality producer in the state. And it's because we do things different than the other people, and we're constantly trying to innovate and find a better formula. So I was a month ago in Turkey. I met with the Turkish energy minister on an outreach from Turkey, not on my own, with a desire there and a pitch for what their oil and gas laws were like and the simplicity of doing business there. England, my son's middle name is Winston. My intellectual heroes, almost to a man, are from Adam Smith to Isaac Newton to James Clerk Maxwell, and so I have a tremendous cultural and emotional passion and attachment to the UK. So I've been coming here for a little bit, but right now, in the little bit of outside data I'm seeing of not much happening, it's not a climate that my personality that wants to make things happen would survive in. I'm here because I care about it.
I'm terribly sorry. We've got a vote. I hope you can stay for a little longer because we've all got to go away for about 10 minutes to vote. We'll be back as quickly as possible. Is that all right for you?
Fantastic, absolutely.
Okay. We'll just begin. We've got two more members still to come, but in the interest of time, you've been very generous, Mr. Wright, with your time, but we are under a bit of time pressure now, so if we could try and deal with the end of your evidence in the next 10 minutes, something like that. Lord Roberto.
Very quickly. I've been reflecting on a lot of what you have been saying. Do you think that it might be helped in the general perception of things if the word unconventional as an adjective was changed?
It's a great question. I haven't viewed it as a negative, but I'm not PR savvy, so maybe.
But it has, well, obviously, it has a certain ring as an adjective. That's all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, it came from, I think as you probably know, that, it's instead of producing the oil and gas that's already leaked out of shale, we're just going to the source rock itself. But maybe you can help us with a sexier name.
Well, Polly.
Address one of the principal uncertainties of the UK at the moment, which is the local communities' concern and anxiety about fracking, and that stands in the way of the process of getting licences and the planning consents, and obviously leads to significant delays. And that is what is happening at the moment. You mentioned the Fort Worth area, where the population density was very significant. But clearly not all of those people benefited from the mineral rights. Most of them didn't. Right? How were you and companies like you able to convince local people before, right at the start of this, before it became clear that it can have a beneficial impact on the local economy? How did you change people's minds?
And I'm not. I would say the industry as a whole has failed in significant amount in that as well. Certainly in the main areas, I would say the majority of people are quite in support of it. There are areas that are different where it's more challenging, and I constantly chastise myself and our industry that we have not done a very good job of reaching out and explaining what we're doing and answering everyone's questions. And we bring frac trucks out to towns and let people come in and ask questions. I think a lot more of that needs to happen. But it's, you know, the oil industry is, well, it's coming into some new areas in our country. That's where the problems are. In areas where the oil and gas industry was there before, that kind of trust or understanding what was going on has long been there. But I think what the industry was least prepared for was, as this technology has developed, which uses less chemicals, more water, deeper monitoring technologies, so that the sort of safety of fracturing has gotten so much better, we were definitely not prepared for sort of an organized groups against hydrocarbon development, not really against hydraulic fracturing, but they've been effective. They've been effective in the United Kingdom, and they've been quite effective in certain parts of the United States as well, in making people believe it's scary and explosive and dangerous and hurts water and a bunch of things that are simply not true. But shame on us for not communicating more convincingly and more openly to people what we do and what the real risks are and what the risks aren't.
And have local politicians taken a lead in explaining to people and advocating why fracking would be of great benefit to the community?
In many cases, yes. Absolutely.
Has the reverse been true?
Absolutely.
Lord Smith.
Yes. I think I know your answer to this, but do you believe that shale gas development in the UK requires a special tax regime to incentivise operators? And recently, as you know, the government has indicated there will be greater rewards to communities if they go along with it.
You know, honestly, I'm not knowledgeable enough to answer that question. Key thing, obviously, you've got to have a reasonable fiscal regime, but I don't know enough about the British to even comment on it. Major to me, and I think very key to this development, is getting the communities on your side. And that needs to happen here as well, and I've got ideas about it, but I'm not in the trenches here.
Do you think that the environmental risks that are associated with shale gas and oil have been well managed in the US?
On balance, yes. Were there mistakes? Could things have been better? Absolutely. And some of those stick in my craw because they get, if somebody cuts a corner and does something wrong, it reflects poorly on our whole industry and the community. But on balance, for the level of activity, the massive economic uplift and all that, I'd say the environmental record, pretty impressive. And I like in the U.S. that it's regulated by the states. So different states try different regimes, and different states adopt other states' regimes. There's a little bit of a feedback mechanism of what's the right way to do that.
Well, could you point to those states which have been particularly effective? And perhaps you talked about, on balance, it's been well done. Give us one or two instances where it hasn't been well done, where there are lessons for us to learn.
I live in Colorado, although I'm not an operator in Colorado, but there's been a lot of concern, and to me, very understandably, from people saying, what's in those chemicals? We don't even know what's in them. You know, this is, and the industry has foolishly kind of not wanted to say because it's their competition against the other guys. I think it's foolish. And Colorado passed a law that all chemicals that are pumped underground have to be disclosed. They're on a website called Frac Focus. And I'm very much in favor of that. The public has every right to know what we're doing, why it works, how, you know, and how it does. I think Colorado's done well in the regulating environment. I would say Pennsylvania, which really is where the frac opposition started. The U.S. oil industry started in Pennsylvania 150 years ago, but it left 100 years ago. And so it's basically a new area. And so they had huge challenges. On balance, I think they've done a nice job, but there were some mistakes early on. One in particular you read about, when you produce gas or oil, you always flow some water as well. This water comes from deep underground. It's got very brackish. You can have heavy metals. It can have norm, and it has things in it you don't want in your drinking water. And there, some of this flowback water went to a local sewage treatment plant, just not equipped to handle what came from there. And they were discharged down the stream with things that never should have been in the stream. And so it was something that never should have happened. It happened. It would never happen in Pennsylvania today. But the best way to deal with this water is just inject it back down where it came.
And does greater transparency help to convince communities?
In what?
Does greater transparency about the whole process help to convince communities, or does it sometimes hinder it?
I'm not aware of it ever hindering it. You know, I think people, just humans in general, are afraid of the unknown, and you know, I am too. So I think that transparency and saying what we're doing and how we're doing, in my experience, has been very helpful. There's always a little bit of NIMBYism in it as well. Like, you know, well, I really want your oil and gas, but you know, can't you drill next to my neighbor and not me? And those get harder to address without some kind of aligned economic incentives or some kind of compensation.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Wright, thank you again for your paper and for all your evidence to us today. And as I said before, you've been very generous with your time. Your answers have been direct and very much to the point from our point of view. And of course, based on your practical experience and wisdom from all the developments that you've seen in the United and helped bring about in the United States. So it's been enormously helpful to us, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much. The questions were fantastic. The fact that you have a committee on it's fantastic, and I'm honored to be here.
If you'd like to stay and listen from the public behind you to our next witness, from the European Commission, you're very welcome to do so. But thank you again.
I will do just that. Thank you.
Thank you.